Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Railyard Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. So this episode today and also the next episode are going to be sharing the audio version of a workshop I did about herbalism and border violence. So just to kind of, read the blurb about it. It was a workshop that I was invited to host with the Railyard Apothecary last year. And I'm super grateful to everyone who signed up to it and contributed. It raised about £500, which was amazing, which will go towards medicine making costs for Calais. I wasn't able to do it live, unfortunately, because of the baby teething and the co-sleeping situation and stuff. But I have been sharing the replay, and I finally uploaded the replay to my website. So anyone is welcome to sign up for that for free to check it out. It means you can see the kind of slides. You can also download the transcript. I've got closed captions on there, so you can follow along. And there's links to like various resources that I mention in the workshop too. So if you want to have a kind of visual experience, then check that out. Otherwise, you can listen to the podcast now. Just about the workshop. So it explores the role of herbalism in supporting refugees, asylum seekers, and people on the move across repressive borders. It explores the politics of the border regime and the role of herbalists in supporting people displaced by colonialism, capitalism, conflict, and climate change. It introduces the work of the Mobile Herbal Clinic Calais, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about a lot on the podcast. So this is a project separate to the Railyard Apothecary that I'm passionately part of and have been involved in since 2019, since it kind of started. And we've served over 10,000 refugees in northern France with first aid and acute herbal care since 2019. And I also talk about the Poland-Ukraine border and Ukraine herbal solidarity, and also lessons from kind of like other herbal refugee solidarity work, people requesting medicine and inside-outside organizing, stuff like that. People who subscribe to watch it will take away practical information about several of the medicines made, detailed specifics of the herbs, and just what kind of herbal medicine can look like in these conditions. Please check it out. I hope it's useful. Continue to listen to the audio. So on that note, if you value what you're listening to and you think, that sounds like really important and inspiring work, then the Mobile Herbal Clinic Calais we are trying to build up our number of monthly supporters. So we're an entirely grassroots project, right? Like we've had various like small grants over the years. We've done big fundraisers like the merchandise that I've sold, the beautiful Plants Know No Borders hoodies and things, and the gorgeous bandanas back in the day, stuff like that. People have organized fundraisers for us and stuff. It's always been like so grassroots, which is so incredible. But like we need that consistency. Like without it, like we cannot keep operating in the field. There is nothing more unbearable than being there, seeing the huge demand, seeing 300 people line up who've got a cough and a cold, who want medicine, and running out because you don't have enough money to pay for the materials. We could have a clinic there year round, but the costs are so high because we're making everything ourselves from scratch with really high quality herbs that people have grown or foraged or sourced organically. And then obviously just the costs of driving there and getting to France and, getting the ferry and all of this stuff, like it really adds up. So each trip costs around £3,000 a month. And that's really us operating on like a skeleton model. So if we could have herbalists and other people supporting us just give like £5, £10, £20 a month, it would be absolutely life-changing. Like if we had that regular recurring income. So I will put a link in the show notes, and I know there is so many things to donate to like all over the world, but for people who are listening, especially from the UK, like this is our border, this is the British state's border, like the British state like fund this violence in France. People literally die like crossing the channel trying to get to the UK, and this is, a really like critical situation that isn't going away. That is probably just going to keep getting worse with climate change and everything else. So like we need that infrastructure. And I think the Calais project is like one of the most in my personal opinion, like one of the most inspiring herbal projects in the world, in that we've developed all these medicines, all these protocols, all these systems and structures to practice herbal medicine within an ecology of care, you know, working with other medics, like triaging people to hospital, like all of these different things. Like, you know, there's obviously lots of amazing examples of grassroots herbalism worldwide, but I do think like we're quite unique in this context. So I would love it if the herbalism community could kind of step up and support the project like consistently, with a regular donation. Like, you know, like a cost of a bloody coffee these days is like £4. Like if you could stick that in our crowdfunder once a month, like on our page, you know, it comes out from Stripe, like you won't ever notice it, if I'm honest. So yeah, I'm just begging you, please sign up if you can, and please ask your friends and family. We're going to do a big launch on the 1st of February, encouraging people to become a monthly supporter. So yeah. Okay, and the other announcement I wanted to make was like basically like a thank you for everyone who's taken action. For my friend Farah, who's in prison, who has stage 3 breast cancer and is not getting treatment, is not getting quality nutrition that she needs. The prisoner being super obstructive about getting her the chemotherapy that she needs. And yeah, basically there's like a campaign trying to support her at the moment, led by a project that she started called The View magazine, which is about women in prison, that goes to thousands of prisoners around the UK, that has been advocating against the criminal justice system, you know, talking about ideas like abolition and stuff for a long time. So yeah, she really needs our support. So I'll put the link to the action alert in the show notes. Basically, you just fill in your details and it automatically contacts the prison. 1,700 people have done this already, and the prison are getting pissed. This is HMP Bronzefield, where I used to be. So personal vendetta. But yeah, just please do your best. There's also a petition going around to get the judge who's ruling over a case kind of kicked off, basically, because she's an absolute misogynist and just keeps ruling for abusive men, no surprise. So yeah, I will include that too. But yeah, please check that out. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the workshop. I will publish part 2 as well. Okay, thanks for listening. Take care. Bye. Hello, welcome to the workshop about herbalism and border violence. Just a little overview of what I'm hoping to cover. So I'm just going to give some kind of like practical things, introduce myself, and then we'll dive into kind of what is the border regime. And we'll talk about the Mobile Herbal Clinic Calais, and kind of do like a deep dive into some of the medicines used in the clinic. And then I'll talk about the work with Ukraine, and we'll kind of end talking about this idea of like border abolition, and sort of like practical struggles towards that. And then I'll share some resources. And yeah, you will be able to, I'll make sure the slides are available to download, and I'll send you a PDF of the different recipes we use with the Mobile Herbal Clinic. So yeah, you're welcome to take notes, but you will kind of get these slides. So yeah, firstly, I'm like so grateful for your presence and your time and energy, and I'm so sorry about not doing this live. Basically, I've got a 6-month-old. He's called Lee. This is him. I thought I'd put a little picture of him. He's so cute. And yeah, we co-sleep, and he's normally like a brilliant sleeper, especially in that first part of the night. And we arranged the talk for like 8 p.m. UK time, thinking I'll be able to sneak out the room, you know, with a camera on him, or maybe my partner could sit next to him. But he's recently been waking up more frequently and being very distressed because he's teething. So I just said like, hey, I'm really sorry. I don't feel like I can do this live at the moment. But yeah, you're really welcome to send any questions to my email, which is info@solidarityapothecary.org. I'm a little bit slow with emails at the moment because I don't have that much kind of childcare help. My partner's out a lot. So yeah, I would just do my best to get back to you, but please like feel free to contact us. Yeah, and just like a content warning, you know, a bit like the kind of prison workshops I do, like there is kind of like explicit mentions of violence, like with the border regime, and yeah, stuff in Calais is just endlessly horrific. And, you know, I'll talk about the racism and the anti-blackness, but this is obviously violence inflicted on racialized bodies. And yeah, I'm just aware that content can be quite difficult for people. So yeah, it just to kind of like take care of yourself. It's totally normal to dissociate when hearing distressing things. Like I normally kind of say this stuff when it's like a live workshop, you know, finding something to kind of help anchor you, like to support through the material, whether that's like your favorite herbal tea or, you know, organizing like with a close friend to watch it together and like debrief if possible, or writing about your reflections. Or I think like getting active is really nice, like in terms of movement, but also like politically organizing, like, you know, maybe after the workshop you could like drop a donation into a project that are organizing support for people on the move and stuff. So yeah, that's just a little thing for that. And yeah, just some disclaimers, like it is obviously like a massive topic in a small amount of time. And yeah, it's just kind of one lens of state violence. You know, there are countless other forms of state violence which intersect with border systems, which I'll talk about. And yeah, the distribution of this violence and oppression is not even, right? Like it's racialized, it's classed, it's gendered. And this talk like focuses on the kind of so-called like British-French border. I'm aware lots of people that come in via kind of Railyard Apothecary are in the so-called US. And so I'm really sorry it doesn't contain content about like the US-Mexico border. I would love to like connect with people working on that border in terms of herbal medicine. There's one project that I mention in the talk, but yeah, I would love to kind of do some podcast interviews with folks that are organising solidarity on the ground there. And yeah, I just want to, you know, say again that the kind of British state has like mastered this art of statecraft, right? Mastered this art of policing and borders and prisons, like through colonialism. And yeah, and when we talk about abolition and resistance to this, I want to name that these movements have been led by Black feminists and radicals, like from the very beginning, and still are. And yeah, I'll just introduce myself, but I use she, her pronouns. My name's Nicole Rose. I'm, as you can see in the picture, I'm white, but my lineages are English, Welsh, and Irish. I've been a kind of DIY herbalist for over a decade, and then completed this formal clinical training with the plant medicine school several years ago now. Need to update this slide, but I run this project called the Railyard Apothecary, and I focus as a herbalist on supporting people experiencing state violence with herbal medicines. Yeah, and obviously, you know, I just want to name that I am white. I'm like, you know, I grew up like super working class in the UK context, but, you know, I'm just, yeah, super privileged, have papers. Like every time I drive to France, you know, it's like a flash of this passport, you know, and I'll talk about that in the talk. But yeah, I just want to name as well that the work I do is part of like loads of collective organizing. When I introduced the clinic, like it is a complete collective project, you know, with lots of people making decisions and loads of different contributions. Likewise with Ukraine Herbal Solidarity. So I know sometimes I can like be a bit of a mouthpiece for some of these projects because of my podcasts and stuff, but they are collective efforts. So the mission of the Railyard Apothecary is to materially support revolutionary struggles and communities with plant medicines to strengthen collective autonomy, self-defense and resilience to climate change, capitalism and state violence. And you can see all the different offerings and bits and bobs that I do at solidarityapothecary.org. All right. Oh yeah. So just like a little overview of the project. So I support people experiencing state violence with care packages, with one-to-one support. I distribute a book called The Prison's Herbal that people might have come across to people in prison for free worldwide. I'm part of this mobile clinic project and Ukraine Herbal Solidarity. I support a lot of people engaged in kind of like movement work and organizing. And I have a podcast called the Frontline Herbalism podcast. But I've mostly been supporting people in prison for the last 2 years. I'm an ex-prisoner. And yeah, most of my sort of political organizing has been around that. Yeah, and you know, I wanted to do something with the group like live when I'd made these slides, but I just want to honor those like killed by borders. Yeah, so please like pause the video and take a breath, light a candle if you can. I've just lost count of how many people I've met in France who we've treated with the clinic 1 week, who've then drowned in the Channel, including like an entire family about 3 years ago. And it's still happening, you know. So yeah, these systems are not only obviously unnecessary, but like they're murderous, right? Like people lose their lives trying to cross to get to the UK, like across the Channel. I'll talk about that more like later on in the workshop. But yeah, I can't talk about this stuff without honouring people that are, killed by these systems. Okay, so yeah, a little bit about the border regime. So yeah, if this was live, I was going to ask folks like, what are borders? Get people to kind of contribute their perspectives of what they think a border is or what the border system is. And yeah, they're made up basically like animals, plants, insects, birds. They've all migrated forever. Humans have migrated all over the world. Yeah, the sand, migrates, like the oceans move, like, yeah, they are a complete human-made construct. Obviously, we have, different separations between land, sea, and sky, but even those like shift with time. So yeah, there is a quote here in a book called Violent Borders by Rhys Jones. I'll read it out for people that are just listening. Borders are not natural divisions between people or benign lines on a map. They are mechanisms for some groups of people. Oh, excuse me, baby, sleep deprivation. They are mechanisms for some groups of people to claim land, resources, and people, while fundamentally excluding other people from access to those places. They create and exacerbate inequalities, and they protect the economic, political, and cultural privileges that have accrued over the past few hundred years through the spoils of colonialism, capitalism, and most recently, economic globalization. Oh, excuse me. Drawing a border is an inherently violent act that relies on the threat of force to support a territorial claim. So basically borders are tools of states, right? Of colonial entities to, enforce separation between people, to control who's coming in and out. But it's worth emphasizing that borders are not always closed, right? They are actually always open for capital, for the movement of goods and services, for exploitation of labor. People don't realize, but like the really big companies, excuse me, sorry to keep yawning. The really big companies were actually, anti-Brexit. Like they, love Brexit because they want that constant flow of kind of labor to exploit. Countries like Greece have things like golden visas. If you pay 250,000 euros, you can access a visa if you buy property. So the rich don't have any problem flying around the world at all. So just wanted to emphasize that. And before I dive into the talk, just a little note on language. So there's a really nice crew called the Migrant Rights Network here in the UK who organise around kind of solidarity with migrants, including refugees. And I just wanted to run through some of their definitions. So they identify a migrant as any individual who has crossed borders between two different countries for the purpose of temporary residence, for example, to study or work. I haven't put their first names here, but I think it's Gracie Bradley and Luke Denora in Against Borders, which is like another fantastic book, right? How the violent exclusion of people defined as migrants, which then makes it possible to illegalize, detain, and deport them, should be of concern wherever it emerges. So, I'm not going to be using language like illegal immigrant or alien or, this kind of language that people use to kind of perpetuate like violence in the media, for example, or encourage deportations, things like this. And I just want to emphasize that people have multiple identities beyond this kind of status characterization of why they have crossed a border. Someone isn't just a refugee or an asylum seeker or a migrant, or, a fucking, sorry to swear, like an expat, right? Like a white expat, like who get that name and other migrants don't. Anyway, it's a whole other workshop. Migrant Rights Network talk about how a refugee or an asylum seeker is an individual who has been forcibly displaced from their home country because of war or conflict, settler colonialism, or because they have been harmed or threatened with harm due to their ethnicity, religious or political beliefs, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. An asylum seeker often has very limited rights in the country they have arrived in. Asylum seekers may seek formal, official protection from the country they have arrived in. Otherwise, they may live outside the remit of the law, fearing apprehension by the Home Office and forced removal. Okay, so what is the border regime? So it is used as kind of shorthand for all the many different institutions, people, systems, and processes involved in trying to control migrants. So what feels like another lifetime now, but while I was doing my clinical training, I had a part-time job, like just working from home as part of a group called Corporate Watch. It's all sort of like anonymous writing, but my kind of co-worker and comrade put together this book called The UK Border Regime, based on his years of experience organising around like refugee solidarity. Like he's Iranian, and it's, he's like super active in different communities, and I helped to kind of edit the book and promote it and stuff, and you can get it for free. I've put a link in the resources section. It's an absolute beast, but you can kind of download that and get an overview of borders, and I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, but I just want to emphasize that like borders are everywhere, right? It's not just the physical location, say in France and Calais. It is literally everywhere. So Gracie and Luke write how borders do not materialize only at the edges of national territory, in airports, or at border walls. In fact, borders are every day and everywhere, determining how people relate to partners, employers, and the police, where they live and work, and their access to healthcare and welfare support. So, there's all these kind of like complex systems like all together at the same time. So, the reporting systems, like people having to go to the Home Office and, like regularly sort of like report in where they risk like arrest and detention. And it's always like a huge source of stress for folks. The dispersal system, so like where people are kind of moved to live, they're often sent to kind of cities really far away, in really horrific kind of like slum accommodation. The systems of raids and the work of the immigration enforcement raid squads. So this is like a team part of the state who raid kind of businesses and homes and other kind of things like mosques and stuff to kind of arrest people and deport them, and it it's just an absolute like weapon of fear. Like it's talked a lot in this border regime book. The detention system, so people are kept in detention centers without with kind of indefinite amounts of time, and they're just kind of they're prisons, they're absolute prisons. Like people are often suicidal, extremely distressed, like unable to leave, unable to access like high quality legal support because of the system, and people kill themselves, and there's a lot of self-harm and abuse going on behind these walls. Deportations, so people are actually like physically quote unquote removed and put on flights and forcibly removed, say for example just from the UK, but obviously this happens all over the place, especially in the so-called US. And there's a lot of, for every part of these regimes, there's like resistance to them, right? Like there's people that have been fighting for a long time to stop deportation, who, tie themselves to planes or kick off or target airlines, things like this, to stop people from being deported. Maybe people heard in the media about the UK wanting to deport people to Rwanda as an alleged like safe third country. Sorry, I could like go into so much detail about these, but I'm just trying to give like a kind of summary. So continuing, investment in Calais, which is what I'll be talking about a lot. So this is the port town in France where many people are trying to cross. So the British state invests millions in fencing, policing, surveillance systems to make it as hostile as possible to people. And they obviously collaborate with the French state to do that. The hostile environment, this is language that a former Prime Minister, Theresa May, brought in. So this is about, kind of literally creating a hostile environment for people to live in, with very strong kind of anti-migrant measures, whether that's banning people from access to certain care or hospitals, or gathering a lot of surveillance and data, to, like people being like made destitute, stuff like this, like loads of rhetoric in the media, just this whole vast array of like anti-migrant measures, and finally like hostile data. So this is systems that the Home Office use to kind of track people. So there's like billions invested in these kind of surveillance systems, like electronic tagging, for example. And throughout this kind of talk, I have included little pictures from this project called Conversations from Calais. So they get different volunteers and people working in France like tell them little anecdotes of what's happened, and it kind of communicates quite viscerally like what is happening there. And then these are kind of like wheat pasted like around cities and stuff. There's a whole book of them now. They're like really, really moving. So this one, the person said, "You told me the day before you had tried to cross the channel and had spent 7 hours at sea. You called the UK Coast Guard for hours, but nobody came. Your face was burnt and blistered. You asked me for the number of another Coast Guard, one that would actually come." And that's just kind of a typical story of collaboration between, the Coast Guards and the border regime of this situation of, different coastal teams like not picking people up, right, and people getting dragged back into French waters and then dragged back into the British waters, and just like all this kind of like horror of not answering people's distress calls, and again trying to create this kind of hostile environment for people trying to cross. So there's a whole bunch of different actors involved. So like the Home Office is like the main government department in the UK responsible for immigration control. Then we have, like the border force. So like these are the guys in uniform responsible for control at the frontiers, people working in airports and ports, like checking people's passports, searching vehicles, being on that front line. And then there's the collaboration of all these other companies, right? Like airlines, ferry companies that let them do this, that let, racialized people, racially profiled people getting on their coaches, things like this. Travel agents, for example, that book all the deportation flights. There's like so many different actors that are part of this entire system of oppression against people, against migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. Security companies who kind of do a lot of the border searches, run the detention centres for profit, for example, and IT geeks developing this kind of big data software and inventing new surveillance systems and weapons. Big business lobbying to try and keep down labour costs, bosses who call immigration enforcement raids on workers demanding higher wages. So lots of people who kind of resist or push back on labour conditions are often kind of dobbed in by their employers. And there's also, just like snitches, who are just people in communities that think someone is like, undocumented and will, call a certain hotline and that will trigger a raid. There's obviously the role of the media. There's all these politicians that kind of posture as like tough guys, tough on immigration. And then, there's like far right agitators and fascists who try and kind of push the window even more of like acceptable hate. And we saw that recently with kind of some fascist uprisings in the UK. And even say in England, there's council and homelessness charity workers that go out with immigration enforcement to find foreign workers or rough sleepers to help deport them, which is just like effing horrific. You can read more about that in the Border Regime book. Like I mentioned, like I'm not talking about borders in other contexts. I'm talking mostly about the situation where our clinic is working in France. But I just want to kind of give this like bigger picture around Europe. There's a kind of map here of like major migration routes to Europe in case, you don't live in Europe and this is kind of all new to you. You can kind of see the red arrow flows. And actually this is quite out of date because there's now this other route in terms of like Belarus to Poland, which is like, kind of more getting more established. There's obviously kind of, the European Union like works together with a system called Frontex to kind of police borders to protect allegedly protect the whole of Europe, if that makes sense. Because there's like a Schengen agreement, which means people can kind of move freely in between these European countries if you have papers, obviously. These are some of the common routes. So if you can see, by the time people get to Calais, they've already had like one hell of a journey, like maybe they've been living on the island of Lesbos, that's part of Greece, and maybe they've been there for 2 years waiting for papers and documents in Greece, for example. Maybe they've got all the way to Germany and lived there for a few years or a few months and then decided, right, they're going to go on to the UK because they want to be reunited with a family member here. Maybe they've been kept in a detention centre in Austria, for example, or maybe they've been employed in Spain on some horrific migrant worker camp, or maybe they've gone via Paris and had to do sex work, maybe they've been enslaved in Libya, for example. We've met people who have literally been enslaved, who've been stabbed with machetes through their guts, literally every horror you can imagine, it is happening, and people are stripped naked and pushed back over borders, for example, in Hungary and Serbia. It's just beyond words, and nothing I can say can do this justice of the oppression people face every step of these journeys. I just want to speak to the kind of fierceness and courage that it takes to, obviously people don't have a choice, right? But I just want to name the fucking resilience for someone to get all the way to France, for example. Okay, so that's just absolutely butchered small introduction. I'm gonna introduce the context in Calais, and I wanted to just read something out from a group called Calais Migrant Solidarity. So they're a crew that have been organising in France since 2009. And I think something they've written about Calais just kind of summarises it really, really well. Okay, so a fundamental component of the state's attack on daily life has been the constant denial of shelter. This was done by refusing to provide sanctioned sleeping spaces, alongside the invasion, eviction, and destruction of any autonomous living places that people created. The ability to live in Calais becoming a point of struggle for migrant communities, alongside the daily attempts to subvert the physical border. Over time, people have made their homes all over the city in disused buildings or squatted camps known as jungles, from Sangul, the Pashto word for forest, both inside and on the outskirts of the city. However, violence and arrest in Calais has never just been confined to living spaces. It is a daily reality that people face both while attempting to cross the border, but also whilst going about other aspects of daily life. The train stations, parks, and just the street are places where people have been repeatedly targeted for ID checks or controls, violence and arrests, as well as constant surveillance and intimidation at the places where people go to eat at the different food distribution places that have been in Calais over the years. The violence faced by people trying to cross the border is the constant that never changes in Calais. People are beaten, caught by dogs, gassed by pepper spray or more serious gas, and routinely threatened and humiliated. And this is all alongside other injuries or dangers that people face while making attempts to cross the border. While violence in public places and living spaces has fluctuated over the years, the police have never shied away from violence in these places where often nobody is watching, where nobody is filming. The police are not the only people who contribute to this policy of violence, repression or discrimination in Calais. The way the UK border operates and the fines imposed on truck drivers found with migrants inside means that the violence at the hands of lorry drivers whilst crossing is also a significant risk. Uncountable lives are wasted and suffer from the violence of the border, whether from the direct attacks by police and border forces or in the attempt to escape their controls, or through the dangerous methods of transit or at the hands of gang masters and mafia. An unthinkable number of people have died in Calais. Alongside the increased security measures over the last couple of years, the number of people being killed whilst attempting to cross in more and more dangerous ways has increased. The people are always in our thoughts. Many times over the last years, these tactics of deterrence from Calais have been met with resistance and defiance. Demonstrations, occupations, and resisting evictions have been commonplace over the years. Most importantly, people have always kept coming to Calais, always carrying on crossing the border and finding ways and places to live while they are here. Okay, so yeah, that's a kind of introduction to Calais, but in terms of our clinic, which I'll introduce properly in a second, basically you can see this picture here of these kind of encampments, right? So people are living in tents, which are taken like every few days from the police, and volunteer groups obviously keep giving them to people so that they have some kind of shelter. There are always kind of really horrible conditions without sanitation, for example. Groups do try and organise like water points and things, but again, the police take them. There's regular food distributions, again, self-organised grassroots groups doing that, which face criminalisation and repression from the authorities there. But yeah, people are kind of like self-organised into these temporary communities and deal with like constant evictions. Calais is obviously right next to the sea, right? So it's like really kind of cold and windy and like difficult like climate conditions. And yeah, just a couple more of the conversations from Calais. You told me the boat had tilted and that you and your family had almost drowned. You said you thought that was the end. Your kids held onto your back. You had a baby with you in the water. After you were rescued, you said you would never try to get to the UK again, but a few days later you attempted the crossing again. So yeah, like the kind of pattern, I guess, in France is it is repeated attempts at crossing, right? So that could be trying to get into a lorry, that could be trying to get a boat and cross the channel, which is the most common way now. And yeah, they're very dangerous vessels. Like often people will sell them to you and completely overload them. They're not always in good condition, so they often sink. People will get to the kind of shore and kind of set off and then be raided by the police, be dragged off the boats. You know, I've treated a 3-year-old girl with pepper spray wounds from the police spraying her. They were trying to spray everyone on the boat to try and get them to fall off into the water. And then they said recently, I think this was in some legislation, that like beating people is actually quote unquote better than things like pepper spray. So they'll just grab people and punch them and get them off the boats that way. And it's just like, yeah, mind-numbingly awful. And people have to try consistently. Often mostly people have to pay to cross, and that's not always financially possible. So, it's kind of, a whole other world. But, okay. But yeah, I just want to emphasize that, like, I think I talk about this later, but basically there's no safe legal routes, right, to the UK. So apart from some refugees for people from Ukraine and Hong Kong, which I'll talk about in the Ukraine section. But if you want to claim asylum in the UK, you have to get to the UK. So you have to risk your life crossing this border, crossing this, body of water. And the other conversation from Calais here, you came up to me to ask if the police would evict you this weekend. Oh, excuse me. I said maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a few more days. You said if the police came tonight, we should pray for you all. So yeah, the police are regularly evicting camps. So that means burning people's belongings, taking people's tents and belongings. I met a man who's the cops were taking his tent and his sleeping bag, and he said, "Oh, can I just get my glasses?" And the policeman was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll get them for you." Got his glasses and then threw them on the floor and just like stamped on them. And this guy literally couldn't see, so we took him to the optician and stuff, got him some new glasses. But it was just like, the things that go on behind closed doors, basically, like, and they won't let other volunteers and stuff. Like, there's some human rights monitoring groups that try and monitor evictions, but yeah, it's super, super repressive. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.